I stood at the bottom of my own driveway last winter, watching my breath fog in the cold, and I couldn't feel my toes. Not a little numb. Gone. I had to look down and wiggle them just to confirm they were still attached and doing their job. I'm Robert. I'm 83. And for years I thought cold feet and stiff knees in the morning were simply the toll you pay for living this long. I don't believe that anymore, and by the end of this, I don't think you will either. I still split my own kindling every fall with a hand axe, an hour at a time. No help, no excuses. My knees don't love every minute of it, but they do it. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly. Circulation and joints aren't two separate stories about getting old. They're one story, told in two rooms of the same house. The blood that's supposed to reach your fingers and toes quickly and warm them back up runs through the exact same vessels that are supposed to deliver nutrients and clear inflammation out of your knees, your hips, your hands. When that delivery system slows down, you feel it as cold feet in one room and stiff joints in the other, but it's the same plumbing. I think about the people I know who are still gardening on their knees in the spring, still climbing a stepladder to clean their own gutters, still shaking hands firmly instead of offering a limp, apologetic grip because their fingers ache. And then I think about the ones who quietly stopped, who started wearing gloves indoors, who stopped kneeling at church because getting back up became its own project. I understand that fear. I've lived some version of it. So let's talk about the actual mechanism, because once you understand it, cold hands and stiff knees stop feeling like two separate insults from age and start feeling like one problem worth addressing directly. Your blood vessels have an inner lining called the endothelium, and its job is to release a gas called nitric oxide that tells the vessel to relax and widen, letting blood move through freely. When blood sugar runs high for years, or when that lining simply ages without support, nitric oxide production drops, and vessels stay tighter than they should. Tighter vessels mean less blood reaching your extremities, cold hands, cold feet, and less blood reaching the tissue around your joints, which depends on that same circulation to clear out the inflammatory byproducts that build up with movement and age. This isn't a fringe theory. Vascular researchers have documented the role of nitric oxide and endothelial function in circulation for decades, and it's one of the most studied systems in the entire body. Your doctor knows this system exists. What your doctor rarely has is the time in an 8-minute visit to walk you through why your knees and your fingertips are connected by the same rivers of blood, and why supporting those rivers matters for both at once. That conversation gets cut for time every single visit for almost everyone. I've read enough messages in our comments to know I'm not describing something rare. One woman wrote in describing her hands as always 10 degrees colder than everyone else's in the room, and said she'd stopped shaking hands at church because she was embarrassed by how cold and stiff her fingers felt against someone else's. That's not vanity. That's a person quietly managing a body that stopped cooperating the way it used to, and adjusting her whole life around it without ever naming what was actually happening. I want to be straight with you before I go further. There is no fruit that unclogs a blood vessel or rebuilds a joint overnight. Nothing does that. What real research has documented is that specific, ordinary compounds found in common fruit can support the vascular function and the inflammatory balance your circulation and your joints both depend on. That's genuinely useful. It's not a miracle, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. If your feet burn at night, or go numb, or feel cold no matter how many socks you wear, please don't ignore it. I almost did, and I'm 80 years old. For years I told myself it was just age, the tingling, the heaviness in my legs climbing the stairs. But it wasn't age. It was my blood sugar quietly damaging the nerves and the circulation in my legs, and almost nobody warned me in time. If you let it keep going, those little signals turn into something you can't undo. I wasn't willing to lose my feet or my independence. So I started doing one thing every single day to help support healthy blood sugar and protect my legs. I'll show you exactly what in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, There's a free presentation linked in the description below. So here are the 5 fruits, hidden in plain sight in the produce section most of us walk past every week. Number 1 is watermelon. It's one of the richest food sources of an amino acid called L-citrulline, and research on citrulline and watermelon supplementation has documented measurable improvements in vascular function, specifically the ability of blood vessels to widen properly when they need to. A more recent analysis of that research, published in the last couple of years, confirmed improvement in arterial stiffness and vessel function in middle-aged and older adults specifically. That's the closest thing to a direct hit in this entire list. Number 2 is pomegranate. Rich in polyphenols that research has linked to the same nitric oxide pathway that governs vessel widening. It's one of the more consistently studied fruits in vascular nutrition research, and a handful of seeds or a small glass of the juice is an easy habit to build. Number 3 is tart cherry. Documented in research on inflammatory biomarkers among people with inflammatory joint conditions, a study on women with inflammatory osteoarthritis found measurable reductions in inflammation markers after regular tart cherry juice consumption. The mechanism researchers point to is anthocyanins acting on some of the same inflammatory pathways that over-the-counter anti-inflammatories target. Though I'll say plainly, this area of research is still growing and shouldn't be treated as settled fact. Think of it as consistent early evidence, not a guarantee. Number 4 is pineapple. It contains bromelain, an enzyme with a long documented history in traditional and modern use as a supportive anti-inflammatory, both taken orally and used topically in some clinical settings. It hasn't been isolated in a single large trial the way citrulline has, but its supportive role is well recognized across decades of use. Number 5 is orange, and the whole citrus family alongside it. Research tracking flavonoid intake in adults found that higher consumption of flavonones, the specific flavonoid family concentrated in citrus, was associated with lower cardiovascular risk over time. Citrus won't replace anything your doctor has you on. It's simply one more brick in a wall built from food you can actually afford. None of these 5 fixes anything by itself overnight. Together, eaten regularly rather than as a rare treat, they form exactly the kind of vascular and anti-inflammatory support that circulation research keeps pointing back to. I get asked often which one to start with if a person can only manage one change this month. My honest answer is watermelon, simply because the citrulline research is the most direct of the 5, and because it's one of the cheapest fruits sold anywhere, most of the year, in almost any grocery store on any continent. Start there. Add the others as they become easy, not all at once, because a habit you can actually keep beats a perfect list you abandon by February. And I don't stop at fruit. Every morning I do 5 minutes of gentle range of motion, shoulders, wrists, ankles, knees, before I ever pick up a coffee cup, because joints that move gently first thing loosen far faster than joints left stiff until noon. I take a 10-minute walk after dinner most nights, because movement is one of the most reliably documented ways to support circulation in the legs specifically. And I keep my hands moving with simple grip exercises, a rubber ball, while I watch the evening news, because hand circulation responds to use the same way the rest of the body does. Just 2 weeks ago, I raked 4 garbage bags of leaves in one afternoon, on my knees half the time clearing them from under the hedge, and slept straight through that night without a single ache waking me up. I want to tell you about a man named Salvatore Prieto. 68 years old, a retired mail carrier who walked routes in Manila for 20 years before moving to California to be near his daughter. He told our group his hands had gotten so cold and stiff most mornings that he'd started asking his wife to open jars for him, something that quietly ate at him more than he ever admitted out loud. He added pomegranate and watermelon to his mornings, tart cherry a few evenings a week, alongside his blood pressure medication exactly as prescribed. He told our group that within about 6 weeks, his hands felt warmer earlier in the day, and the stiffness in his knees when he first stood up in the morning felt noticeably shorter-lived. He was careful to say he couldn't separate out how much came from the fruit versus his new evening walks, and I respect that he said so. I share his experience as one man's story, not a promise, Every case is different, and none of this replaces what his own doctor has him doing. What mattered most to him wasn't the jars. It was that he opened one himself, without asking, and his wife didn't even notice until he mentioned it 3 days later. Small thing means everything when it's your own hands doing the opening. He also told me something I think about often. He said the hardest part of those cold, stiff years wasn't the physical discomfort itself. It was quietly recalculating what he was still capable of, month after month, and slowly shrinking his own sense of who he was to fit whatever his hands and knees allowed that particular week. Getting a little of that back, he said, felt less like a health improvement and more like getting a piece of himself returned to him. Please don't stop or adjust any medication because of anything I've shared here. Talk to your own doctor about your circulation, your joints, and anything you change, including what fruit ends up on your plate. I think often about the people my age still kneeling in their gardens, still shaking hands firmly, still warm from fingertip to toe on a cold morning, and the ones who quietly gave that up, assuming nothing could be done about it. So much of what separates them comes down to whether they kept feeding the rivers running through their own body, instead of accepting the cold and the stiffness as simply the price of the years. It's not too late to pay attention to that. The body keeps responding to attention, even at our age, even after years of being ignored. If you made it this far, you already understand more about your own legs than most people your age ever will. That matters. You know now that the burning, the numbness, the cold feet, they trace back to one thing: blood sugar slowly working against your nerves and circulation. And you know the goal isn't a miracle. It's protecting your ability to stand, to walk, to stay independent. That's why, alongside everything I showed you today, I use a simple daily support to help keep my blood sugar in a healthy range, so my legs keep carrying me where I want to go. I put the free presentation in the description below. Go watch it. And as always, keep working with your doctor. This supports your routine. It doesn't replace it. If cold hands or stiff joints have been part of your mornings too, tell me in the comments which one bothers you more. I read every one. And if this kind of honest, mechanism-first information matters to you, subscribe, because we break down exactly this, one real cause at a time, every week.